She said the text made no sense. No known alphabet, no recognizable syntax, just shapes, scattered across the page like broken reflections. But when I placed the mirror over it, the message completed itself. It answered my question. Before I even asked, who wrote something that can see the reader? And why would someone hide a language in the way we look at things? He had read thousands of decrypted transmissions in his life, but this one made Elias stop reading mid-sentence. A torn Soviet file, buried inside a mislabeled archive at the Arkhangelsk University, referenced something he had never seen before. Not just coordinates, not just a station, but a term handwritten in the margin, as if someone had added it in haste. Pyataya Stanция, the fifth station. No official designation, no existing map records, just a single entry. Confirmed anomaly 1954 unstable, contact lost, reappearances irregular. Elias leaned back in the creaking chair, eyes fixed on the microfilm. It was just after midnight when the message came through. His breath fogged the lens. A private line encrypted. He found something to himself. You need to see it. Don't bring anyone else. Station, no name. Why wouldn't they number them like the others? Istanbul. He went through every surrounding document. By sunrise, I was standing. Internal in a quiet alley near the intercepted radio fragments. The call to most were echoing between the ancient weather data. Equipment. A woman appeared behind the hall transom door. Her expression sharp, like someone who had already regretted reaching out. Hidden between two maintenance reports was a personal journal. She asked, unsigned. I nodded. Just the initial VOSO at the cover. And its pages, yellowed and warped, were full of erratic entries. To a small metal most detailed shifts in temperature, compass failures, magnetic field disruptions. Followed her through a dim hallway. All dated late winter 1954. But the tone changed, she said. Halfway through, I restore Ottoman manuscript. The station is here again. For museums, not where we left it. Sometimes same structure, for private collectors, different surroundings. Some rooms are then added. Reversed. This one, Feb 22, shouldn't exist. I spoke to myself today. The room we entered was small. Just stared like I was the copy. On the table, Elias sat in silence for a long time, mounted carefully under glass. He didn't believe in ghosts or parallel universes, and yet something was immediately wrong. And the script wasn't Ottoman, Arabic, Persian, or Greek. It was data. It wasn't repeated, structured anomalies. At least not anything written for human eyes. Took digital photos curved in unnatural ways. Then he asymmetrical. 3 days later, uneven outskirts of Colima, like symbols glimpsed in a broken wind carved across the snow like glass scraping metal. I've Elias stood outside a rusted checkpoint. This one, its red star still clinging to a crooked pole. Know what direction it's supposed to be read in. Shack. It doesn't respond to ultraviolet, not even infrared in layers of wool. It's like it doesn't want to be seen. A tin mug. I crouched, Doctor eyes scanning the details. He asked. The ink didn't reflect light with a northern accent. It absorbed it. That's me. At certain angles, entire sections disappeared. Yes, my uncle served here. Where did this come from? Said there was a station that vanished. Thought he was losing his mind. He wasn't. It was hidden inside the binding of a black and white photo from his travel journal. He took this just before he disappeared. To a cartographer named Mevlana Vazir. No one ever saw that building. I wasn't even supposed to. The photo showed a man in the leather was too thick waist deep around him. Style. And in the distance, so I cut a sharp-angled structure of steel. This was folded inside, shaped almost like a blade buried in the ice again. Elias narrowed his eyes. Repetition. How far from here? But not phonetic. 8 kilometers. Maybe spatial. But the trail bends. I reached into my coat pocket, never the same twice, and pulled out a thin, square mirror. Elias followed. I often used him into the snow. 2 hours later, under the pale light of a dying sun, the trees cleared. Layla frowned. What rose before them wasn't ruins. I placed it gently over one corner of the page and standing like it had never been abandoned. Completed a shape, rectangular metal not walls, by mirroring it, slanted roof but by responding to a single antenna. Still disconnected marks covered in frost. Formed a perfect Lev stopped walking. An actual I never go further than this, he said. There are sounds at night, looking like back at me. Layla stepped back. But when I check, no print. Did you draw that? And sometimes, no. I see myself in the window. But I'm outside. Isn't reacting. Elias turned. The page isn't changing. But the reflection inside the station, the air was stale, not breathable. Physically, the walls echoed faint static from somewhere deep inside. I moved the mirror across another section on the metal floor. Again, 2 instrument lines aligned to form many smashed. Not a word in any language I recognized, as if still running silent operations. Symmetrical. Then he saw the marks. Intentional. Like whoever wrote this design. Not old. Pressed sharply into the thin layer of frost, Layla whispered, and they matched. So it's not a language to read, it's a language Elias to look at. Touched one of the prints. I nodded. Cold, exactly. Crisp. I took a breath, fresh, trying to push away the static buzz rising in my chest. Looked behind him. Tell me everything about this vizier, his own trail, I said. Where he worked, what he studied. Another set mirroring his Layla opened a drawer and pulled out a worn file. Both identical. Very little. One veered left. He was part of a small group of imperial cartographers into the Sultan Selim II. He whispered to himself, no surviving audible, no records. I haven't been here before. Just this journal, which was never catalogued. I got to know a contact in the corridor felt too quiet. I scanned the notes. Not the kind of silence that travels from east of Anatolia, but the kind that holds its breath. Briefly, Elias moved slowly. There's a mention of his flashlight tracing the edges and something about mirrors or panels. I froze. The two sets of footprints still stretched ahead of him. Layla handed me a loose page with a translated quote, unpredictable from Vizier's journal. But every few meters, one of them only through reflection does truth take like its outline had softened. What is seen directly is only a veil. He passed through what looked like a lab. The walls were lined with analog equipment, so he wasn't hiding a Soviet-made oscilloscopes. He was hiding how to see. Chart printers still holding paper curled with age. Do you think it's a map? The air inside was cold. I looked back at the page. Freezing. And then he heard it. I think it's more than that. It's a way to unlock multiple maps by a soft hum. Information layers behind perception. Flashlight raised, but only if a single machine had come to life. One of the tape recorders. I held up the mirror again. Spun slowly and then stopped. This thing, Elias, it doesn't show anything unless you're already looking. He hadn't touched any specific. He stepped closer. You don't read reels were old, you interrogated intact. Back at my rented flat, I laid the manuscript across a wide wooden table beneath a single voice lamp. Date unknown, and this is Istanbul's morning traffic hummed below the window. Subject 3 made contact. The room felt frozen. Was me. Like the moment before something ancient Elias blinked again. He rewound it. I positioned 3 mirrors at different angles around the page. He stepped back and each time I shifted the light, the equipment wasn't randomly placed. Each never the same and never predictable, all facing toward a wasn't about reflection alone wall. It was about a detailed diagram had been drawn in chalk, watching in silence, errors, I moved notations in Russian, with surgical at the center precision. One phrase was underlined over and over. Isn't just geometry, I muttered. Layers of reality, conditional logic, Elias took a syntax. She leaned forward. He zoomed in on one section. How can a language work without phase drift increases after physical contact? It doesn't need consistency. Contact with what? Then he heard a door shut. Each arrangement is a response to how it's from deeper inside. She frowned. He followed the sound. You're saying the reader bent into a hexagonal tunnel. I gave a slow nod. Flickering overhead tubes, but only within limits. Dim. Elias could see his possibilities. The temperature had dropped at least 5 degrees. You don't decipher. He turned a corner and entered what must have once been the communication center, then added, maps covered the It's a reflective interface, some not a written language, some pinned with rusted nails. In most were of the Siberian region. Layla blinked over, but oddly, some were marked ahead of anything red circles in the same forested area. I glanced at her, but with slightly different coordinates each time. We may have forgotten more than just we think. Just a few digits off. She stood and walked toward the window, kept shifting, pulling the curtain to dim the room. He examined one shadows moved across the page. A red pen had drawn a line that looped back on itself, forming an imperfect spiral. I leaned closer. A note inside in the corner read, "Reality orbit appeared, faint entry points, coordinates unstable." She asked. Could be. Elias whispered. I copied them into my notebook. They weren't tracking weather. They were tracking when they were format. Then let me try something. Behind him. He pulled out an old decryption no one a custom tool I'd built. He called out instinctively, collapsing multidimensional mapping data. He stepped into the hallway again. Geographic reference. The same 2 sets of footprints remained, still fresh. As I ran the figures, after a few moments, I looked up. Set had begun to Eastern Anatolia. Just 2 prints. Near Erzincan, at the hallway entrance, facing toward him. Is there anything there? I shrugged. Nothing. Elias didn't move. I turned back to the manuscript and placed the smallest mirror directly over the central. He looked into the darkness ahead. It vanished. I saw the faint glow of a green indicator. It disengaged, light blinking. The ink reacted by dulling every few seconds and steady as like revealing a second layer below the source of the blinking was a chamber marked almost like experimental containment. There's something behind the door groaned as it opened. Layla nodded. Inside,
We can lift
Elias
the
found a
sheet.
circular
I have
room. Fiber-safe
wires
heat pad.
coiled across.
She retrieved the equipment
floor.
and gently applied
Thick
low
glass
windows
windows
across
ringed
the back
the
of
chamber,
the page.
all fogged over.
Within minutes,
A chair
the
sat in the
fibers
center,
loosened, just
bolted
enough
to
to
the ground,
peel a
surrounded by
thin
what looked
layer
like an
away.
old neural mapping
Underneath
device.
was a map,
And scrawled onto the far
but not a
wall,
traditional
scratched into the steel
It
with
was a
something
construct.
sharp.
Geometric
Were 4
lines
words
in
reflection
English.
cues.
Do not
And a
trust
central
reflections.
spiral that looked like a vortex of
Elias
symbols.
stepped
The
closer.
same logic applied.
Examined the
It
device.
wasn't visible all at once.
The wires led to an interface
You had to
that
move
showed
around
no
it to
screen,
see.
only analog
Layla
dials
whispered.
and a speaker.
It's not
He
a
pressed
map
a button.
you look at. The speaker
It's a map
hissed.
you enter, then
I
clicked.
stared, captivated.
And a voice came through.
And
his
that
voice.
spiral, I've seen
Dr.
this form
Ward,
before in ancient
if you're
Armenian
hearing this,
monastic
then the loop has
inscriptions.
begun.
And you've
They were
already seen
decorative.
it. Elias
They were
froze.
alignment tools.
You
think
won't
Vizier
remember
learned
recording
this
this.
from them?
I didn't either.
Possibly, or maybe he
But
was one of them.
You
You have to
Layla's
listen
expression
carefully.
shifted.
The fifth
You mean
station doesn't move.
He
as it
belonged to a
slips.
society.
We do too.
Not officially.
The versions
But there
of
were
us
scattered
inside this
mentions.
place, groups
Some of them never
imperial
leave.
cartographers,
Click.
who believed that direct
Silence.
observation was flawed.
Elias stood there.
That truth could
breathing
only
heavily.
be revealed through indirect
Versions.
perception. He
Mirrors,
looked at the
shadows,
glass,
distortions.
wiped the fog
Not
with his
because they
sleeve,
hid things,
and for a moment
but
there was
because
nothing.
they showed what the
Then
eye
something
ignored.
moved, but
She
not in
looked
sync
uneasy.
with him. But
Why hide
reflection
all this in
blinked.
such a way?
After he
I
did,
exhaled
he
slowly.
stumbled back, because not
And the light above
everyone
him
should
flickered.
see
The
everything.
base wasn't abandoned.
Some knowledge isn't about
It wasn't
power.
malfunctioning.
It's about
It
permission.
was breathing, reacting, alive.
Not in the
Sat down
organic
again,
sense, but
quieter
something
now.
else. After a long silence,
Something
she
deeper.
asked, "Will you
Layered.
go to Erzincan?"
He checked his
I
recorder.
didn't answer right away.
Battery still strong.
My eyes lingered on the spiral.
But the counter was
Something
glitching.
about its shape.
Time
felt
reading.
familiar.
12:47.
I think I have to.
12:45.
She nodded.
12:47.
Take this.
Looping.
She handed me a folded
Elias
piece of
turned
vellum,
and walked back
a
into the
replica of
hallway.
page
But this
overlay.
time, there
It'll
were
help
4
if the original
sets of
reacts
prints.
differently in the field.
The fourth set of
As I
footprints
packed up
wasn't
my tools,
complete.
I
Only
glanced
3
once more
prints.
at the
Then,
reflection
still hovering in the mirror.
Elias crouched
That
by them,
single
trying
eye.
to understand.
Watching.
The spacing was wrong, as in too wide
Not
for a human
menacing.
stride. As
Just
if whoever had made them had stopped
waiting.
mid-step, or disappeared before
I
the
whispered
next
to
one
myself.
could land. Who
He
built a
looked up.
language that looks
The
back
hallway
at you?
was empty. And more importantly,
The air had
why does
changed.
it feel like it
The
knows
cold
I'm
had
getting
deepened.
closer? Not just
The
physically,
drive to
and
Erzincan
it felt
took
quiet
over
in a
10
new
hours.
way.
Narrow
Like something
mountain
was
roads,
waiting.
shifting
He
altitudes
pulled out his
and
long
long
stretches
stretches
where
where
the
followed the
signal
remaining
vanished
trail.
entirely.
The original one. I passed villages
Deeper
where
into the
time moved
sublevel.
differently. The
Slower,
stairs led him
heavier,
to a sealed
like the
section
stone
of the
walls
station.
and rusted.
Iron
Heavy
glass
gates had been
doors
watching for
stood
centuries.
half open. The coordinates
There,
led me to a high
locking
plateau east of the
mechanisms
city,
fused in place by
where the
time
land
and
broke
frost.
into quiet
A
ridges
faded
and
sign
hidden
above read,
valleys. Audio
"Nothing
archive,
official
Zapletner
marked the
site.
zone. No ruins,
Audio
no
archives,
monuments,
restricted
just
zone.
an open field
Elias
with wild
stepped
grass,
through,
scattered rock
rows of
formations,
storage
and
cabinets
the distant
lined the
hum of
walls.
wind through pine
Shelves
trees.
sagging under the
I
weight
stepped
of
out of the
hundreds
jeep
of reel-to-reel
and scanned
tapes,
the area.
all unmarked,
Looks
labeled
like
only
nothing.
with numbers. I murmured. At the far end of the room, which
There
means
was
it's
a
hiding
single
everything.
working station.
I walked the
Playback
field for almost an
console,
hour, still connected
checking
to an
orientation
ancient
points
Soviet
against the
audio
vellum
system.
overlay.
The
Surprisingly
spiral
well preserved.
drawing from the manuscript
He wiped
didn't
the frost from the
correspond
console
to any
surface and
elevation.
pressed a switch,
But
a
its
soft buzz
did match the
A
angles
green
of light.
flickered to
I
life.
waited until the
He took
sun
a random
dropped
tape
behind
from
the
Western
shelf
Ridge
and inserted
That's
it.
when the shadow lines
reels
started to
spun,
fall exactly where they
static.
were meant to.
Then a series of
Voices,
natural
but
stones,
not in Russian,
cracked
in
and
English.
irregular.
His English
suddenly
I
made
think this is
sense.
me.
Their
I
positions
sound
weren't
tired.
random.
Different.
They were markers,
But it's me.
land-based
I followed the
coordinates,
footsteps again.
encoded not
They
by
stopped where
writing
mine
but by
began.
placement.
The
And in the
voice on the
center,
tape
partially
sighed.
buried, heavy, was a flat
Resigned.
slab of stone
I
shaped
think I've
like
done
an
this
octagon.
before.
I cleared
I
it
think
with
I'll
my
do it
hands.
again.
A faded
Elias
inscription ran along
stood
the edge,
frozen, listening.
not letters. That voice
Symbols
wasn't
again.
recorded decades ago.
But
the
this-
tone, the inflection, time I recognized the
sounded like
structure
him
now. And more
It
than
was
that,
a mirror map.
It
You
referenced
had to
things
stand
that
in
had
the
only
right
happened
position
hours
for it
ago.
to say anything.
Maybe minutes. He
I
pressed
set
up
up
a small
inserted
travel
a second
mirror,
tape.
angled
This one
it carefully
carefully.
mid-sentence. The symbols
We shouldn't have
aligned,
stayed this long.
and one
The
word
station
revealed
mirrors
itself
us.
in full
It
clarity.
reflects until it doesn't
Aina.
anymore.
I saw
Turkish for
Lev
mirror.
last night. I
But
whispered
he
it
wasn't
aloud.
outside. He was inside.
Then
Watching
behind
me
me
from
from
the
the window.
window.
Wrong
He's
direction,
not real
Dr.
anymore.
Ward. I spun maybe
around.
he never was.
An old man stood at the edge of the field,
Elias stepped
wrapped
back,
in a dark wool
unsettled,
coat, a walking stick in one hand.
staring
His
at
eyes
the
were
shelves
sharp, and he
around
wasn't
him.
surprised to see
There
me.
had to be hundreds
"You
of
know
these.
who I am?"
How
I
many
asked.
versions of
He
me
gave a
walked through
single
this
nod.
station, he whispered.
"You're
He
looking
took
for
a deep
something
breath,
that doesn't want
picked
to
a
be
third
found."
tape. This one was labeled
stepped closer.
3C. The
"Did you
only
leave
tape
this here?"
with a visible mark. He smiled. The audio
Faintly.
began, low
"I'm
and
not old enough
distorted.
for that."
Then
His accent was
Doctor
local but refined.
Ward, not rural.
"You have to find the mirror
He walked
chamber."
slowly toward the slab.
Elias's
tapped his
eyes
cane on
narrowed.
it. My
He hadn't
grandfather
heard
was
that
part of a
phrase
group.
before.
They never
It's
called
beneath the
themselves
main
anything.
corridor.
But they were the
Level
last
2.
ones who understood that
There's a
maps
hatch
weren't
behind
always
the
drawn for
observation.
travel. Lab,
Some
you'll
maps
know it
were
when
for
you see it.
understanding.
You can
For
still
remembering,
choose,
I studied
but once
him.
you hear your own voice from
Cartographers.
behind the glass in
Thinkers,
it means
he
you've
replied.
crossed. But yes, they
The
used to
tape
say
ended.
if a line on a map
He
points
stared
you
at the
somewhere
machine.
physical,
"You're
find
not
the
reading
mirror
it deep
deep
enough."
I paused.
Elias turned and
What
left the
was
archive
this place?
room.
Climbing
"I know,"
back up the
he
metal
said.
stairs, they
"Toward
called
the
them
main
circles
corridor.
of orientation.
The observation lab
not
had
sacred,
been locked earlier.
not military.
Now
Just
the door hung
a
slightly
line.
ajar.
Each
He pushed
stone
it
here
open.
reflects another somewhere
Inside,
else.
the room was intact.
If you learn how
Filled
to
with
trace the
broken
reflection,
observation equipment,
you can follow
no
a
thought
pinned
through
through
space.
boards, glass
I took
panels
that in,
overlooking
slowly.
a frozen trench outside.
You said I was looking in the wrong
and
direction.
in the back corner,
He
partially,
pointed with his stick.
hidden behind a
Toward the
stack of
slope below the
overturned metal
ridge.
crates, he saw it.
If you stand
A
where the line
circular
crosses
hatch
the
in the
pine
floor.
shadow and look
He
west
moved
through the
closer.
glass,
The
frost
next
covered the
node will
handle.
answer.
Scratches
He turned to leave
circled
and
the
wait,
edges like
called.
someone, or
Why are
many,
you helping me?
had forced it open
The old man
repeatedly.
stopped.
Elias
Because
knelt,
you're not the
touched
first to
the
ask the
steel,
right question.
then pulled.
But you might be the last
The
to
hatch
ask it the
creaked.
right way. The cold that came
Then
out from below was
he vanished
unnatural.
behind the ridge,
Not sharp.
his footsteps
but
swallowed
hollow.
by wind and silence.
Like
the
I
kind of
followed
air
his
that comes from a
instructions.
place without
Set
time.
the mirror by the
He
shadow
pulled out
line,
his flashlight,
waited for the sun to
descended the
drop
iron
2 more
ladder.
degrees.
Below the space
Then
was
in the
dark.
glass a set of figures
Stone
appeared,
walls,
not
different
on
from
the
the rest
stone,
of the
but in the
station.
reflection of the slope
Older.
itself.
Almost
Lines,
like a foundation
grids,
that predated
and
the
a
base
sequence
itself.
that resembled coordinates
Cables ran
again.
along the walls,
But this time,
leading into a
they
single
came with a
chamber
depth.
ahead.
As he
1526.
entered,
The flashlight
not
flickered.
a time.
The room was
A layer.
circular.
This wasn't just
Smooth.
space-based. It was
Almost
time-locked. These aren't places,
At its
I
center,
whispered. A large,
their moments,
square panel
moments
of glass stood
embedded in
upright,
geography,
mounted like a monolith.
I took photos,
a
notes,
mirror
and
cracked
marked
along
along
the
the
edges,
edges.
then stood
Elias
in
approached
silence,
slowly.
letting
It
At
all
first
settled
it
in.
showed nothing. A language built
Then
on mirrors,
movement,
shadows, angles,
his
and
memory
reflection appeared.
Cartographers who didn't just
something
map
was
what
off.
existed.
They
The
mapped what
background
was
behind
meant to
it
be
was
seen
different.
only under the right
The
lens.
angle of the light,
not power.
the clothes,
not treasure.
and, but
The
context.
reflection didn't move when
Truth.
he did. It
I
tilted
packed
its
my
head
equipment
and waited.
slowly,
Then,
glancing
in
once
perfect
more
sync
at
with
the
his voice,
octagonal
it spoke.
slab.
You're
It
late.
didn't glow.
Elias stepped
It
back,
didn't
heart
hum.
pounding.
It
He looked
didn't
around,
promise
no
anything.
speakers, no hidden
But it
device. He
remembered.
spoke aloud.
The
What is
coordinates
this? Who
pointed
are
me
you?
back to
The
Istanbul,
reflection
but
smiled.
not to any museum
I'm
or
the one who
archive.
stayed.
Instead,
A flash
they
of
led to a
static
narrow
cut
street
across
in
the
the
mirror.
Fatih district,
For
tucked between a
split
spice shop
second,
and a bookstore that
Elias saw another
hadn't
room
opened
behind
in
the
years.
glass. At the end of the alley was a
cables
metal
hanging
gate,
from the
rusted
ceiling,
shut, with
a
the Ottoman
second Elias
Elias still
strapped
visible
to a
above
chair.
the arch. Then
I checked the nameplate
nothing.
beside it. The glass
Barely
turned
legible,
black,
but still there.
only his real
Mekteb
reflection
Inur.
remained. He
The
stared
school
at it,
of light.
unmoving.
It had been closed for
and
over a
whispered to
century.
himself.
Records
What
listed
did
it
they
as
do
an
here?
experimental mathematics
Elias
school,
stood there,
briefly
staring
funded
at the
by
darkened
imperial
mirror,
scholars,
waiting for
then
something,
abandoned.
anything to move.
But the name,
But the surface stayed
the
silent.
name was deliberate.
ordinary.
Layla,
Or
met
pretending
me
to
outside.
be.
He turned to leave.
You're sure about
And
this?
froze.
She asked.
The corridor he had entered through.
I've seen this
was
location.
gone.
The
Before,
opening was now a solid
reflected
wall.
and not directly.
Smooth, I replied.
No seams.
She tilted
no
her
exit.
head. He
So
reached out,
we're breaking
touched
into a
it.
school.
Cold,
Because of a reflection.
solid, concrete.
I looked at her. No,
No,
we're asking
this
you
was
something.
here.
I
And
came
I
in
think
through
it's ready
here.
to answer. He scanned the room on the
She
opposite
smiled,
side,
half
where there had
amused,
only been
half
darkness.
nervous.
A new door was now
Inside,
visible.
the school
No
was
hinges,
frozen in time.
no handle.
Stone walls,
Just a vertical line
arched
of soft
ceilings,
white light splitting
layers
the wall.
of dust
Elias
thick
walked
enough to
toward
swallow
it.
footprints.
As he touched the
The
seam,
central
the door
hall was
slid
circular,
open silently,
unusual for
revealing
Ottoman
another
design.
corridor.
No decorations,
Visually identical.
no writing,
But something
just
was
bare
off.
symmetry.
The lights
At first
were brighter.
glance, it looked like a dome of silence.
The walls looked cleaner,
but when
and
the
knew a
sunlight
brush
from
in-
the broken window
but
hit
somehow
the center of the floor, more, older. Something shifted. He stepped inside. I raised my
The
hand
new hallway led
to
to
stop
a lab.
Layla from moving. But this one was active. Wait. Lights on, the light machines humming softly in a perfect circle. A radar screen blinking steadily in green. The edges of the room. On the central table, as it touched each himself sitting right there, lit up in that same glowing, same coat, same just visible. But in the moisture rising through, he was smiling. He hadn't smiled since arriving. It's happening. He opened a drawer. Again, more photos. I stepped into black and white. At certain angles, mirrored in the polished floor tiles that had geometric patterns. One showed him speaking with ones that didn't exist when looking directly at the walls. Standing outside with the scientist's journal waving to a camera. A language made of reflection. But he had never brought the journal with him. But here, these aren't records. It wasn't on paper. They're possibilities. It was architecture. On the wall, a panel display, every curve had been designed not for function. Top, 2025 blinked. Below. This room is a page. I said softly. A new line was forming. Layla moved around the perimeter as if it was deciding what to show. Mirror. Then it appeared as she turned it toward one of the curved beams. A series of marks aligned into view as again he left the room. Not on down a soft sound, voices. She read them aloud. Familiar voices. What you see belongs to the world. He followed them to the end of the tunnel and stepped into a surveillance room. Small black and white monitors filled the walls. That's not poetry, I said, showing different. That's instruction. Rooms of the station. At the edge of the room, but every monitor one of the stone columns was cracked. Him, barely noticeable. In one, he read the journal looking for it. In another, he spoke toward it and pressed gently. In another, he slept in one of the beds. He watched himself from behind. The center of the circle from the front. Shifted. Not a trapdoor, staring directly into the camera. A square stone panel rose just enough to reveal a recessed behind him. Layla's the door slammed shut with a heavy metallic echo. You knew that would happen. No, but the language was pointing dimmed. This space wanted to be activated. A voice emerged. We opened the panel. His voice. A stairwell descended into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag. We're going in. On screen. I nodded. Ford Layla's image hesitated, but Elias hadn't. The stairs were narrow, tilted his head, then raised his hand and pointed. Directly at the camera, stepped into a chamber no larger than a small library. Shelves lined the walls, of the screen, the label read into dust. Observation room. What remained were sheets of thin metal. CA light stacked in sealed cases. A glowing line appeared on the floor, leading and to a door that now stood open. He didn't hesitate. Isn't the next room was a library? Oh. Dusty. Its alignment data, books scattered on the floor, written in Russian, not in space, Arabic, Hebrew. These plates are designed to be held up against the same title, or a station vibe, or a mirror, internal field. And what passes through them logs each one dated. She nearly all authored by Dr. Tilted Elias Ward. My flashlight and flipped to the center. The reflection scattered against the ceiling, but he had never written. A symbol appeared in the margin. One I recognized immediately. The fifth station is not a location. The same spiral. It is the intersection point between intention and memory. It wasn't just a map. The room seemed to turn slightly around him. Central in time wasn't linear here. A point of memory passed through geometry. The station wasn't a facility. It was a living archive, a memory engine. This was a transmission system. A mirror that recorded every decision, hesitation, and version of those who entered. This room is a receiver, and maybe, I looked up, some who never left. The curved ceiling above us was built to focus the reflections inward. Something fell. Like a lens. From the opposite shelf, standing here with the right alignment, sealed could decode what was being transmitted from other nodes. Carefully. Inside. So the field in a single was a sender. She asked. No label. Yes, just one faint line of handwriting. This is where it was supposed to be seen. Instruction. She stared. He no longer knew if he was still in the present. What were they trying to say? Or if he had crossed one of the layers, letting the light dance across the walls. The next message was for him. It's not about what they said, I murmured. From a version that already knew what came next. Back in Elias the chamber held the tape between his fingers like Elias stood at a center. He didn't know surrounded by silence and layers of shadow, but he knew exactly where to take it. The patterns of reflected. He made his way back through the corridors, the strange spiral, or at least he tried. Everything pointed to the station. No longer followed any kind of logic. This wasn't some rooms had disappeared. Language. Others looked. It was a different way of seeing. Layla held up another plate. The radar in his pack letting the beam from Elias's flashlight pointing toward directions that didn't exist. On the far wall, a series of intersecting lines. The original one was still a shape inside them, waiting. It shifted slightly with the movement of light. The console was still powered, not still humming. Like it had never been turned off, she said quietly. He inserted the tape. For what? Took a breath. Elias stared. Pressed play. The voice that came through was calm. He stepped closer, turning off the flashlight. Too familiar. Darkness. If you're hearing this room, then you already know. Struck a match. The flickering flame
isn't
casts
a
softer
place.
shadows.
It's an observer.
And through the holes of a third
recorder.
plate now hanging from the
Not
ceiling,
just of reality,
a figure
but
emerged.
of intention.
Not a map. Every
Not a
step you
symbol.
take here creates
A
another
scene.
version of what could have
Three
happened.
mountains.
Or already did.
A crescent.
This loop wasn't
And
built.
beneath,
It was
then
triggered.
a circle of people.
A pause.
It
Long
wasn't
enough
a
that
message
Elias
to
thought
read,
it
it
was a
ended.
memory. But then
A
the voice
recording
returned,
written
not in words,
softer
but in
now.
geometry and
Almost
reflection.
personal.
Like a
I've seen
projection
things
system
here that
only
you'll
worked
see
if
too.
you aligned everything
Maybe
perfectly.
not the same way.
Space, light,
But you'll
intention.
feel it.
Elias whispered
The hesitation.
to himself.
The
They
choice
didn't
you almost
leave us
made.
answers. The door
They
you
left us
almost
questions.
opened. The station
shape
keeps
of
all
truth.
of it. Because someone
Layla
built it
looked
to
at
understand something
him.
we still don't.
What does that mean?
How the moment of a decision
turned to
can
her slowly.
reshape everything. It means this entire
Elias
system was
stepped
built
closer
to resist being
to the
understood
console.
by
The
accident.
tape kept spinning.
You don't stumble into
You'll
it.
find the terminal.
You
You'll
don't
be given a
decipher it
choice,
unless
and they'll
you're
ask
ready
you
to
one
ask
question.
something specific.
Not what did you
It
see,
reflects
not
your
what did you
intention
do.
back at
They'll
you.
ask,
Did you ever stop watching?
You paced slowly
Click
across
end
the
of
chamber.
tape. He stood there.
And that's why the
Symbols never stay the same.
The soft hum of the
why the
motor
map
winding
shift
down
filled the room
It's not
like
chaos,
a sigh.
it's a mirror.
Then,
And mirrors
behind
don't lie.
They just don't tell you
Him,
more than what you're ready
the
to
wall
see.
opened.
She looked around
Quietly.
Then what were they
Patiently.
protecting? A hallway
Elias
revealed
stopped.
itself. That's just
White.
it. Maybe
Clean.
they weren't protecting a thing.
Dim.
Maybe
At
they
the
were
far
protecting
end.
a way of thinking.
A terminal.
One that can't
Elias
be stolen.
walked.
Only
The
floor
shared.
felt like glass
When the
beneath
seeker
his
is
feet.
ready.
Layla lowered
No
her
reflection.
voice. And are you ready?
Only his steps.
Elias didn't respond at first.
And
his
a
eyes
distant,
lingered
steady
on the
pulse.
spiral one last
When
time.
he reached the
Then
terminal,
he
he
saw a single screen. I thought I came
No
here for
keyboard,
translation.
no buttons.
For
Just one
understanding.
question.
Are you the
But
original?
now
I'm starting to think. Elias stared at the
I was
words.
just
being seen back. He didn't know the
He
answer.
closed
His notebook slowly. The screen blinked. This wasn't
The
about a lost
question
manuscript.
changed.
Or a
Do you want
vanished
to
map
remain?
maker.
Above
This was
him, a
about
light
confronting
began to
the
flash
idea that
behind
seeing
him.
voices isn't the same
Faint
as understanding.
whispers.
Some
They
he
left the
recognized.
chamber in silence.
Others, outside, the sun
He
had started
chose
to
to
set.
stay.
This
The
light
light
hit
wants
the windows
out.
of the old school.
Let him
strange
angle.
like the rest, casting a perfect
Elias
mirrored
closed his
circle on
eyes.
the courtyard floor. What if I don't answer? As
He
if the building itself
whispered.
had watched them go. The screen responded.
Elias turned.
Then,
For one last
the station
look.
will choose for you. I wonder how
took
many
a slow
more places
breath.
like this exist. Stepped
He said.
back. Layla
Look.
smiled faintly.
Around,
the walls were
Probably.
fading, revealing
And
rooms
more than we
within
can
rooms.
imagine.
He
Hallways
nodded.
that bent back to
That's
their
what
start.
worries me and what
Screens
drives me.
showing versions of
Some
himself.
languages aren't made
Each
to be
one at a
spoken.
different point
Some
in the journey.
truths can only be seen
One
sideways,
was still reading the
or
journal.
not at all. Another
But if
just
reflections can hide meaning,
stepping into the snow. What
third,
else have we
listening
misunderstood
to the tape
just
for the first time
by looking
but
straight
only
at
this,
it? Elias was
maybe the
standing
next
in front
message
of
is
the
already
terminal.
written, not
And
in
then,
ink,
in the corner of the screen,
but in the way
one
light
last
bends around
line
a forgotten
appeared.
wall.
Observer
Maybe it's not
registered
about where you go,
cycle complete,
but how you look when you
everything
get there.
went dark. And if you're still here,
Location.
you're probably looking
Unknown
for it
time,
too. Unknown.
So
Elias opened
until
his
the
eyes,
next
strapped
file.
to a metal chair, the same one he'd seen before, now real, wires on his wrists, a monitor reading his brain activity. The door opened. A man entered. Old lab coat, cracked glasses. He glanced at Elias and nodded. He's awake. Another one completed the loop. Elias tried to speak. Nothing came out. The man wrote something on a clipboard. Same response. Every version thinks, it's the first. He turned to someone outside the room. Prepare the next iteration. Everything faded again, but just before the silence took over, he heard his own voice. Only different, detached, ironic. You watched. All the way through, didn't you? And maybe that's the whole point, that there's no end, only observation. And the one who keeps watching might not be the one inside. Maybe this wasn't a loop at all. Maybe it was a signal, waiting to be received by someone who could finally hear it. And if you followed the trail this far, then you've already stepped inside the station too. You're part of the observation now. The real question is, did you ever stop watching?